Mr. Albert once joked with me, "If I fall at home, I hope I fall near the phone." I replied, "Better yet, let me teach you to fall and get up like an English gentleman."
Before, I was afraid of falling. Now, I'm just afraid of stopping trying.
If you don't want to be like him, I can help you improve this. I remember very clearly the day I first said that to a man named Albert Thompson, 74 years old, who once stood in the middle of a windy construction site, but struggled to get up from a chair in his own living room. The story I am about to tell is not only about a body that has weakened, but also about how a person tries to keep his pride when time begins to take away his strength. I am Dr. Noah Jupe, a physiotherapist in a small clinic in West London. For over 20 years, I have dealt not just with injuries and illnesses, but with a much more formidable foe, fear of losing independence of the elderly. Albert is one of those cases that I can never forget, not because his physical condition was so serious, but because his eyes said more than any diagnosis. On a gloomy morning in March, when London was still wavering between winter and spring, Mr. Albert said to me a sentence more unusual than any before.
Dr. Knoll, I think it's time I tried stepping outside.
Not a hike, not a walk in the park, just a simple step through the gym door onto the small courtyard behind. But for someone who used to dread getting up from a chair, it was more than a step, it was a statement. I didn't answer right away. I quietly put on my coat, opened the back door, and said very calmly, as the British usually do, respecting every individual's decision, "If you're ready, I'll go behind you, not to hold you back, just to watch." He walked to the door. His hands weren't shaking, but they were clenched tightly as if he were performing a precise calculation. The small step in front of him had been his limit. This time, he didn't ask, "What if I fall?" He just took a deep breath and stepped down. It wasn't a perfect move. His knees wobbled a little, but he caught himself without my intervention. What was most memorable about that moment? Not the movement, but the eyes. The eyes of a person who has just signed a contract between himself and life. "I'm still here." We continued on to the bench under the leafless oak tree. Each step he took on the ground was a stamp, confirming that he was no longer the man who lived against the wall. When he sat down on the bench, no panting, no trembling, just quiet. I knew. All the practice sessions in that room had finally led to this moment. A moment later, without looking at me, he said slowly, "Before, I was just afraid of falling. Now, I'm just afraid of stopping trying." I did not reply immediately, because in England, there are sentences that do not require a reply, just respect with silence. In that moment, I no longer saw a sick person. I saw a person who had just regained consciousness. Choice yours. The right to stand up, the right to sit down, and the right to not let fear define the rest of your life. When we returned to the room, I asked him, "Do you still need the stick?" He smiled slightly, his eyes still looking towards the door. "Maybe one day I will need it again, but if I do, I will still walk, just slower." That's the difference between a winner and a quitter. A winner is not someone who never falls. It's someone who never tries. Never allow yourself to lie down forever. If you're reading this, you're probably not Mr. Albert. You might be younger, healthier, or even think this doesn't concern you. But remember, no one knows when their legs will start to slow down. And the only thing that can protect us then is not medicine, not machines, but the will not to give up movement. This story isn't for runners. It's for those who have slowed down and are scared. If you've ever worried that one day you won't be able to get up, then stay with Albert and me, because his journey can be a reminder to you. The power never leaves us. We just forget how to use it. And as we British say, gently but sincerely, feel free to follow, leave a comment, and subscribe. Anyone who really wants to know more, just leave number 1. I saw clearly that he did not want anyone to help him. He refused to let his son go with him, saying, "I can still walk by myself. I just need the wall to hold on to." These were not words of pride, but of a man struggling with the feeling of losing himself. He did not come to be cured. He came to not be a burden. Albert was a civil engineer, accustomed to the sound of metal, measuring tapes, and massive structures. But now the thing he could not climb was a single step in his house. He said that every time he got up from his chair, he had to count to 3. 1 to breathe in, 2 to press his hands into the chair, 3 to pray that his knees would not betray him. No one saw, but it was the moment a man felt himself disappearing. I'm not asking how healthy you want to be. I'm just asking one thing. If one day you could stand up without holding on, what would you do first? He was silent for a long time, then said softly, I'll go out to the garden myself to see if the roses are still blooming. Young people often talk about big dreams. Old people only wish for one simple thing, free to walk on one's own land. During the examination, I discovered something familiar. The core muscles are almost no longer active, the thigh muscles are weakened, and the balance reflex is significantly reduced. It's not a disease. It's just that the body has been neglected for too long. The scary thing is not that the body is getting weaker, but that the brain has begun to believe that it is impossible to go anymore. I said to him, Albert, you are not useless. Your body is just sleeping. I will not awaken it with medicine, but with your own will. I don't promise you miracles. I show you a path. Slow, long, but true. It doesn't begin with walking. It begins with he relearned how to sit up straight and breathe. Because in recovery, the first thing is not to strengthen the muscles, but to regain confidence in yourself. He looked at me and said, Doctor, what if I fall? I answered directly, I can't promise you won't fall, but I will teach you to get up like an English gentleman. It was a deal between us, not between doctor and patient, but between two men who did not want to surrender to time. As the third week progressed, I noticed that something had changed in Albert. Not his muscles, that was too early, nor his gait. He was still slow and cautious. What had changed, says, whereas before his eyes had always been scanning the ground for something to hold on to, now he began to look straight ahead as he entered the room. A very small change, but in rehabilitation medicine, it was a sign that the patient was starting to want to move forward, instead of just trying to not fall. I decided it was time to give him a real challenge. Standing in the middle of empty space, no walls, no chairs, no handrails. I said, Today, we will stand in the middle of the room. He looked at me frowning. What if I fall? I replied slowly. Then let us see how you can stand up. No earth is useless if it teaches us to stand up. Its light does as well. I led him to the middle of the room, where there was only the wooden floor and the light. I stood back, keeping enough distance to intervene if necessary, but not to support him. He stood there, his hands slightly open, his fingers trembling like someone walking on a rope bridge. 1, 2, 3. He kept it. 5 seconds. Not just 2 or 3. 5 seconds of standing straight, not clinging. As he stepped back into his chair, I didn't say good, I just asked, How do you feel? He replied, as softly as a confession. The first time. I didn't think I would fall. That's enough to get me going. I start with the most important exercise at this stage, chair stand. Stand up and sit down from a chair without using your hands. This is more than just a physical exercise. It's a rite of passage. The first time, he stood up so quickly and then sat down so hard that he was startled. I said, Strength lies not in getting up quickly, but in sitting down slowly. On the 4th day, he did it 5 times. Not perfectly, but he didn't give up. Then one morning, when he walked into the room, I realized he does not carry a stick. I asked, Did you forget it? He smiled slightly, a very British smile, discreet and restrained. No, I left it at the door to see who remembered it more, me or it. That was the day I knew. He no longer came to be cured. He came to claim dignity. In later sessions, I added a balancing exercise with one foot lightly touching the ground and looking straight ahead. He was so focused that the room seemed to disappear. Young people often need music, motivation, a shout. Old people just need enough silence to hear themselves. At the end of the 4th week, I asked him an important question. If one day you fall, what will you do? Without hesitation, he replied, I will fall cleanly and get up properly. It's wanting the jest and in the step to endowsen airy well. That's when I understood. He was no longer recovering his body. He was recovering his character. If you have come this far, you will understand. Age does not take away strength. It only asks us whether we still want to be strong. I was in no hurry to ask Mr. Albert to stand or walk. People who are afraid of falling do not need to be pushed. They need to be believed you can try. I sat him in the middle of the room, bare-backed, his hands in his lap. The room was so quiet I could hear him swallow. Not out of discomfort, but out of nervousness. I asked, not to test, but to open the first door. Do you know what is most dangerous at this age? He shook his head. It's not falling. It's being so afraid of falling that you stop. It is true in geriatric medicine, kinesiophobia causing the nervous system to become defensive, the body to stiffen, and balance reflexes to decline. And from that moment on, people do not fall because of weakness, but because dare not go anymore. During that practice session, I only asked him to do something seemingly simple, sit up straight, but for someone who had used the back of a chair and the wall for support for years, keeping himself upright was a challenge. He tried to push his shoulders back, but his back immediately arched. I placed my hand gently on his back and said, "It doesn't have to be perfectly straight. Just let your body understand that you're trying to stand up from the inside." He sighed, but he didn't give up. After a few minutes, I asked him to try standing up without pushing against the chair with his hands. He looked down at his feet as if they belonged to someone else. I took a step back, not touching him, and said, "I won't lift you up, but I won't let you fall." The first time, he stretched and stopped. The second time, he trembled and sat back down. The third time, he stood. In just 2 seconds, but his eyes were no longer the same as before. He sat down, tired, but let out a very soft breath. Not a gasp, but the breath of a man who has just found something he thought he had lost. I didn't say good. I just asked, "How long can you stand?" He replied, 2 seconds. I nodded. 2 seconds is a good start. This week, we'll go for 3. They was Ramon lighting infallement, and for they will be no lighting in the good test. I explained to him that balance does not start with the feet, but with the core muscles. The deep muscle group around the abdomen and hips keeps us standing. When this muscle group falls asleep, every step is unsteady. Medicine calls it sarcopenia, the loss of muscle with age. But I don't speak in terms. I say this, Albert, if the house loses its load-bearing walls, the roof will collapse, and so will your body. We will rebuild from the foundation. And she will, in brilliance. There follows in surf, in 9D. The first assignment I gave him was very small. Raise your knees when sit, not to move, but to wake. Each time he lifted his pillow, only a few centimeters, he sweated as if he were climbing a hill. I didn't applaud. I didn't praise. I just let him hear my heart, which many people at that age forget still beats for them. A week later, when he could stand for more than 4 seconds, I asked, "Are you still afraid of falling?" He replied without looking at me, "Yes, but not to the point where I wouldn't dare try again." That's the biggest step forward. Not strength, but courage. I knew, from that moment, he didn't just come for treatment. He came to reclaim what time had stolen, the right to stand up to life. I have found that every senior carries a silent battle within him. For Albert, the battle is not in his muscles, but in his thoughts. Maybe I'm too late. It's a phrase that many patients don't say aloud, but their hearts whisper every day. And to break that mindset, I can't just give exercises. I have to help him feel the value of every little movement again. One afternoon, while we were practicing standing up and sitting down, he suddenly stopped and asked me, "Why is such a simple move so difficult?" I sat down next to him and replied, "Because this is not a matter of the body. This is a matter of patience. Young people practice to be healthy. Old people practice to not lose themselves." He sat there for a long time without saying a word, but I realized that from that moment on, he no longer saw the exercise as a challenge, but as a dialogue between the weak and the strong parts of himself. I started by giving him a deep breathing exercise, not to relax, but to reduce his panic reflex when he felt unbalanced. I told him, "Whenever you feel like you're about to fall, don't hold your breath, just breathe. Breathing tells your body that you're still in control." Is this 10 the rain? He practiced seriously, sometimes so seriously that I had to make a small joke. "Mr. Albert, don't try to breathe like a marathon runner. We're just making peace with our knees." He laughed, a short, genuine laugh. It was the first time I had seen him laugh since the start of the treatment. And I knew from that moment on, we were not just recovering our strength, we were recovering our spirit. Not long after, during a practice session, he said something very special. "Dr. Noah, I realized I wasn't really weaker. I just stopped using myself." I replied, "That's right. The body is like a room. If you close the door for too long, dust will gather. But wiping it away doesn't mean rebuilding it from scratch. It's just waking it up. I have always believed that the elderly do not need cheers. They do not need anyone to say, keep going. They just need a reason to never give up. And when he told me he wanted to go out into the garden by himself again, not to look at the flowers, but to check if he still belonged there, I knew his real battle had begun. If you've come this far, you know that recovery isn't a miracle. It's a long negotiation between fear and hope. And next, Albert isn't just going to stand in the room, he's going to walk out. I am Dr. Noah Jupe, and the story doesn't end here. Because behind every Albert, there's a David, a Margaret, someone who's afraid of falling but has never been taught how to get up. If you want, I will continue. There will be more exercises, more stories, more ways for you to stay strong, even though your hair is gray, even though your hands are shaking. And as we British like to say, gently but sincerely. Thank you for staying with me. Feel free to follow, leave a comment, and subscribe. Whoever wants to start their journey, leave number 1.